welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the complex reality behind the political rhetoric of defending state water rights and engineered international blockades. Water disputes in India are so often painted with these massive, broad strokes. Politicians making grand promises, states pointing fingers at one another, and headlines screaming about international treaties. But when you actually strip away all that posturing and look at the hard data, the physical infrastructure, and the actual river flows, well, a very, very different picture emerges. So we're going to cut through the noise today and look at what is actually happening to this incredibly precious resource.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 5 key areas. First, the grand pledge. Second, the domestic battleground. Third, the shrinking denominator. Fourth, the infrastructure reality. And finally, fixing the real leaks.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the grand pledge. Engineering an upper riparian reality.
Not a single drop of water meant for India shall flow to Pakistan. Now, this is a quote that captures a really steely political resolve. It's about engineering a total blockade of water to Pakistan and doing it within an incredibly tight 18-month timeline. This bold statement by the Union Minister for Water Resources sets a massive, almost unprecedented engineering goal. Following the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, the strategic intent here is to harness India's full entitlement of the western rivers. But, as our source material points out, political resolve doesn't actually divert rivers, right? Dams and tunnels do.
To actually achieve this grand pledge, massive engineering projects have been proposed to permanently alter the hydrology of the western Himalayas. We are talking about the Leh Arch Dam in Ladakh, which is projected to store anywhere from 4 to 5.7 million acre-feet, or math, of water. Then there's the Burster Storage Project on the Chenab, adding another 1.2 MAF. And perhaps most significantly, the proposed Marhu Tunnel, which aims to transfer up to 4 million acre-feet directly from the Chenab Basin right into the Ravi Beas system. This is a literal attempt to create a permanent structural reality on the ground. However, let's be real. Achieving this in 18 months requires ground to already be broken, environmental clearances cleared, and massive funding secured.
Moving right along to Section 2, the domestic battleground, the paper-water conflict.
Let's look at the chaotic, decades-long history of the Sutlej-Yamuna Link, or SYL Canal. Honestly, it's a masterclass in institutional paralysis. Way back in 1981, an agreement was signed to share surplus river waters among Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan. Construction of the SYL Canal actually began, but then in 1990, tragic violence against engineers forced construction to a complete halt, and it never meaningfully resumed. Fast forward to 2004, Punjab passed an act to unilaterally terminate those agreements. And then in 2016, a Supreme Court advisory opinion favored Haryana's claim, which prompted Punjab to return the acquired canal land to its original owners.
So what is the result of all this? While grand international posturing happens on the world stage, our domestic projects remain paralyzed by competing claims from neighboring states. We literally have states aggressively litigating over their share of water, turning a vital natural resource into a political weapon. This unfinished 214-kilometer trench is so much more than just a failed infrastructure project. It absolutely symbolizes decades where successive governments chose politically legible actions over structurally necessary ones.
Which brings us to Section 3, the shrinking denominator, or as I like to think of it, fighting over a shrinking pie.
Now, what if the massive volumes of water these states are relentlessly fighting over no longer even exist in nature? 17.17. For decades, domestic disputes have been anchored to this specific number from that 1981 agreement, 17.17 million acre-feet of surplus paper water. Now, paper water is a fascinating concept. It's water that exists in legal documents, court filings, and bureaucratic ledgers. Essentially, every single argument between Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan is based on dividing up this exact historical number.
But here's the catch. We are facing a shrinking denominator. States are aggressively litigating an obsolete baseline while the river itself has significantly less water to actually give. That 1981 estimate of 17.17 million acre-feet is vastly different from the estimated current availability, which sits at roughly 13 million acre-feet today. So, while tribunals spend 40 years trying to divide the water up on paper, the actual physical volume of water flowing down the rivers has been steadily declining. They are quite literally fighting over a pie that is physically shrinking.
Let's move to Section 4, the infrastructure reality, myth versus machine. Talk about a jarring juxtaposition. We have this huge gap between pledging futuristic megadams in record time and the fact that our existing critical infrastructure is sitting completely broken. On one hand, we're promising to add over 5 million acre-feet of water via massive new Himalayan tunnels. But on the other hand, the current reality of the Sutlej link system paints a really bleak picture. For example, the Dahar powerhouse, which is a crucial piece of existing transfer infrastructure, had literally all its turbines completely offline for over 100 days, right during peak demand.
And the harsh hydrological reality just cannot be ignored. Recent data for the Babbar Dam shows inflows and snowpack are at roughly half of their normal seasonal average. For instance, Babbar inflow was recently recorded at around 16,500 cusecs compared to a normal average of nearly 32,700. Cumulative inflow and snowpack are sitting at 0.74 and 2.2 billion cubic meters respectively, again, barely half of the normal average. When you combine that kind of climate stress with a sprawling reservoir that has lost a quarter of its original storage capacity to silt, you get a system that is pushed to its absolute limits.
I love this quote from the source analysis. A planning document is not a repair schedule. Because the truth is, bureaucratic reports cannot fix broken turbines, and neglected maintenance actively worsens the water crisis. When the Responsible Management Board was pressed about those offline turbines at Dakar, the response was just to hand over a report on modernization and life extension. But a planning document doesn't move water. It really poses a vital question. Can the very institutions that are currently failing to maintain existing infrastructure realistically be trusted to execute and operate massive new megaprojects on incredibly tight timelines?
Finally, let's hit the ground level. Section 5. Fixing the real leaks. Ground-level pragmatism.
Politicians absolutely love to blame the scorching sun, but the real silent thief of our water is physical seepage to poorly maintained, unlined canals. Evaporation is highly visible. Everyone experiences it, which makes it a perfectly malleable political alibi, but studies show that unlined earthen canals can lose up to 50% of their water to silent, invisible seepage deep into the subsoil. Blaming evaporation for distribution shortages is, more often than not, just a convenient way to avoid discussing the actual political costs of fixing broken infrastructure.
Furthermore, flawed agricultural policies that provide zero-cost electricity mean farmers have absolutely no financial incentive to conserve water. This is perhaps the largest structural leak of the entire system. In places like Punjab, the combination of free power and assured procurement of water-intensive crops like paddy encourages a flood irrigation method. I mean, think about it. When the input cost of pumping groundwater is zero, the rational response is to pump as much as possible, which is just accelerating a severe groundwater depletion crisis.
So what do? We need pragmatic, immediate fixes at the ground level to reverse this crisis. Step 1. We absolutely have to transition away from flood irrigation toward efficient methods like direct-seeded rice, which drastically reduces water use. Step 2. We must line our agricultural canals to physically stop those massive losses from seepage. And step 3, we need to implement strict urban metering and fix the leaks in our city networks. Now, these solutions might not make for fiery political speeches, but they are exactly what actually saves water.
I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to consider as we look toward the future of our water security. Can we truly build the ambitious dams of tomorrow while neglecting the broken pipes of today? The grand geopolitical ambitions and massive infrastructure proposals are going to mean absolutely nothing if we continue to fight over outdated ledgers, ignore our failing turbines, and subsidize the depletion of our own groundwater. True water security doesn't start with political rhetoric. It starts with fixing the broken pipes of today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this helps you see the water crisis with a whole lot more clarity.